talking about hope and responsibility and embracing different types of knowledge, which is what I'm researching at the moment, I would like to say that in this presentation you are going to see that I quote many different authors, and that is very part of my own research, because I try to enact words that I find a source of inspiration or a deep reflection, and I would like your feedback at the end of the presentation and say to me, yes, we can see you're doing it, or maybe, no, you're really doing a bad job, okay? And second thing is that I'm going to talk about discourses and dominant discourses today, but before I would like to clarify what I intend with those terms, so that it's clear to everybody what I'm referring to when I say discourses and dominant discourses. So by discourses I intend the production of knowledge through language, and this language influences social beliefs and practices. So in Foucault's words, they inform and influence, affect how people act in a given society. But when does a discourse become dominant? It becomes dominant when it is institutionalized through legal, political systems, through education, and it gives an oversimplified image of a reality, where the dichotomy of an us versus them is made very sharp through establishing that my own reality, the reality of an ideal us, is much more important than the reality of somebody else. And so they become really the instrument of the normalization of an hegemony through which power over is legitimized and considered to be the norm. So I love very much what Colombo says about dominant discourses as sedimented knowledge, a knowledge that we are not fully aware about because it's so embedded in ourselves, we don't even see it clearly. And when I was writing this presentation, I kept asking myself, what are the regime of truth, this sedimented knowledge that affects my own understanding of the reality in which I live, my own way of being in relation to others? And I found out that there were many different dominant discourses affecting me. Today I focus on one in particular, which is, as you've probably guessed, I'm Italian, I move my hands a lot. In Italy at the moment, the anti-immigrant dominant discourse is very much promoted by the far-right party Lega Nord, which is believed to have around 30% of popularity. Okay, so quite a big number of popularity. And it is based on what we call the neo-racism, so a new form of racism based on ethnic and cultural differences. And how does this dichotomy of which I was talking about work? So there is the other that is represented as a threat. Whoever comes from a poorer country in Italy, this could be mainly, in our case, Morocco, Tunisia, Romania, Albania, Santo Domingo, is seen as a threat to the host nation. So, and these are some examples of the dominant discourse appearing in public speeches, political discourses, on television, on radio, Italians first, immigrants who still fight rape and deal with drugs. And then there is the us, proper, generous, splendid people. And so you can see that with the anti-immigrant dominant discourse, the logic of avoidance unfortunately wins over the one of the reciprocal encounter and knowledge of each other. So there is no curiosity, no stimulation to kind of stimulus to say, who you are, can we get to know each other? And so, marginalization is the answer to the anti-immigrant dominant discourse. So people are isolated. So who am I in relation to these discourses? Well, I'm a researcher of my own life. I'm not affiliated with any university or anything as such. I'm just researching what I'm doing, the life I'm leading. I'm an Italian citizen. I'm a parent educator of 2 small children attending school. But I am, above all, a living theorist, which means that I use living theory to look at those identities that influence, those identities, my own practice. So for those who are not familiar with living theory is a form of personally orientated action research which places the I at the center of the inquiry, and we are asked to look at our own ontological values as kind of the motor of our own actions and what we try to do in our own lives. And then we face living contradictions and feeling of negations that are seen overcoming those as a source of growth in living theory. Living contradiction is if I think to believe, to have certain values, but I do not see them mirrored in my actions, and so how I can try to work on my values and enact those values better. And a feeling of negation is when we feel that the values we believe in are not mirrored in the context in which we are living. And also we are asked to look at the influences that, for the better and for the worse, have contributed to the way we see the world, to how we are. So my own living theory. There are two main values I discover I have, which are hope and responsibility, together with other values which I share with the wider living theory community, such as democracy, justice, compassion, respect for the person. So when I was writing this presentation, I really tried to look at the pervasive effect of the anti-immigrant dominant discourse within my own life. And, in living theory term, I was looking at the socio-historical and socio-cultural context in which I was brought up. And I found that actually I've been really affected by the anti-immigrant dominant discourse, which started in Italy in the early 90s when I was around 2 years old then, okay? So despite the fact I was brought up in a family where the values of justice and democracy were considered central, nevertheless the context in which I was living, attending school, was promoting the anti-immigrant dominant discourse. And the anti-immigrant dominant discourse made me fear the other. But only recently I was able to name this fear, and that was thanks to inquiring into my own values. And I realized that I wasn't naming the fear because that fear was in contrast with the values in which I was brought up, nevertheless was there. So to live my values more fully and to overcome the feeling of negation that I feel in seeing the anti-immigrant dominant discourse disclosing itself in action and speeches in Italy, as a citizen, as a researcher, as a parent educator, as a living theorist, I must do something about it. And to become also aware of my sedimented knowledge. And so, what I do and where do I do it? And why I did it. So, my children are, they are 6 and 4. They attend a council school, which in Italy you could say is a state school. This school is attended by about 30% of pupils coming from mainly Morocco, Tunisia, Albania, Romania, and I decided to stop in the courtyard in front of my children's school. And why in the courtyard? Because it was the embodiment of the anti-immigrant dominant discourse. Because you could go to school, you see, especially mothers, and this is also another dominant discourse, which I'm not going to talk about today, but mainly mothers coming to pick up the children, and they were all divided in their ethnic groups. They were not communicating to each other. The kids spent 8 hours together, but they will just go back, each to their mother without playing. And that for me was looking at the embodiment of the danger of what the anti-immigrant dominant discourse, do. Isolation, marginalization. And, whilst I was looking at it, I was inquiring in my own living theory, and I found out that part of my personal responsibility was realizing that there is no social justice without cognitive social justice. What does it mean? That in my way of interpreting this is that each human being is a holder of a knowledge that it might not be formally recognized by an institution such as a university, but is a holder of a story, of certain sets of values that is worth considering if we believe in justice and listening to. And whilst I was doing this, Hope was leading the process and I was reading Siegel at that time. We may eat different types of food, but we all eat. And there were our children not sharing even the playground together. So, I wanted to do something because I don't think there is nothing to fear in sharing the bread that we make, whether it is a pita, a bagel, a croissant, or whatever, So what did we do? We started to stop outside the courtyard. We started to talk to each other and find out that actually we had very similar concerns about the situation in the courtyard, that each of us felt isolated in our own ethnic group, and we were actually all keen to get to know each other. So we started to let the kids play more. We brought simply a towel and eat on the same towel in order to kind of create a bit like today, a circle of persons sharing experiences and their own life struggles. And whilst we were doing it, I think it's very important to say that a certain number of issues raised. I've asked permission to all the mothers of the children if I could take the photos today here and to have the sentences that we are going to read here. So, Rabia, for instance, coming from Morocco, felt that she was really feeling isolated and lonely in the reality she was living in Italy with her own children. And there are NGOs programs in the town I live that tackle some of the issues these people have, such as language skills or economic difficulties. But she said to me, I feel even more lonely and isolated because, again, I'm with people that have got the same kind of problem. I do not integrate. I do not talk with the other people on the street. It's, again, a form of marginalization. So the school closed. We started to go to the beach. We started to take the kids on our bike. And whilst Rabia felt less lonely, nevertheless, we all, Italian mothers, were learning something. And this learning was about values, because these women, despite the economic struggles that we're facing, taught us something really important. And this is Julia, is not me, another Julia, is another mom saying, I must learn from them, they always think of the other. And there was no time, those women wouldn't arrive to the park, to the beach, offering whatever they had, putting always the other first in contrast with their own personal need. There was a culture of sharing that we were learning from. So we were really trying to convert that, that power over of the dominant discourse in the power through which we were all really trying to learn from our hideous plurality without annihilating each other, but learning from our own differences. And nevertheless, we had many, many instances in which the anti-immigrant dominant discourse disclosed itself. And here on the right, there is an example. We were told many times that what we were doing, sitting in a park together, was improper. Nevertheless, we couldn't find out what was improper in what we were doing. But my own vision of what is proper counts more than your own vision of what is proper. So, in the others' knowledge for the living experience, because Rabia, Monia, Michela really teach me something about knowledge for the living experience. I do not have any university degree. Nevertheless, I feel that I learn every day a lot from them. I see values which carry hope for the flourishing of humanity, which is a central aspect in the living theory inquiry. And I must recognize, the moral imperative of recognizing their own knowledge as part of my personal responsibility and act on it every day in the hope that we can influence the future that actually is represented by our own children sharing the same school, which I don't want them to grow up in a culture of fear. But also, whilst I'm trying to recognize the negative power of the anti-immigrant dominant discourse and many other dominant discourses I have faced in my life, I also need to focus on the positive influences, because otherwise it becomes tragic. And those have been the educational encounters with unique human beings that have contributed to the knowledge I have today, to the person I am today. And I would like to conclude thanking, some of these people who are not here today, but without whom I wouldn't be presenting those lights to you. And those are Pendo and Charles in the first two photos from Tanzania, who, believe me, didn't have any formal education, but they have introduced me to the knowledge for the living experience, and they passed me amazing sets of values. And I would like to thank Moira Laidlaw, who is also not here today, but who introduced me to the world of living theory, and I wouldn't have been able to recognize the power of the knowledge of Pendo and Charles if it wasn't for her. So thank you.
We've got a couple of minutes, so come join us. So responses to
Julia, that was amazing. Yeah. I was absolutely entranced, and I've read it before. I just totally think what you're doing is so amazing. You are an amazing person.
And I totally support what you're saying, because it's such a difficult subject, and you've been able to, narrate it to us or share it so beautifully that I think one of the reasons people are probably not asking questions because they're so taken.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Thank you.
So I've got a question. I was just thinking that we've been talking a lot this conference about sustainability and how do we keep this going. To me, this just, what you've brought to us is so, shows the sustainability of it, living your life in a way that actually inquires. I just wondered if you had anything to say about how that could be actually brought more fully forward into the future of action research.
Well, actually it's an interesting question, because I've been asked many times in the last 3 days what I do. And it is actually a dominant discourse of which I didn't think about before. But the fact that I'm not affiliated formally with any university, and the fact that I'm inquiring as a parent educator, let's call it as a mother, I see people looking at me and, being very dubious about what I'm doing. I don't think there is a recognition of the value that a parent educator may have in actually influencing the future, even though it is, I think, a fundamental personal responsibility that those, who have children face every day. So I don't know what to answer to your question, Sonia. I think that certainly from my side, I need to inquire more in why, on one hand, I feel still a difficulty in naming what I'm doing. And I think that, on the other hand, I also think that, I don't know if this job could be done with an institution, because, I wasn't running a research. I was just living my life.
I think it is to be done by other people.
Yes.
But
I think it's the most sustainable.
Should we just have one more? Because I would just like just like secret, and then we'll move on if that's okay.
I just wanted to thank you so much for this very concrete example of how you really change the world by living your values more fully and becoming more aware of your values. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Keep going.
I think because I'm such a lousy timekeeper, I just want to perhaps make a link into the workshop, because I think we've covered all of that, Julia, and I think that was a really good link into the workshop. So I just wanted to make the connection. I started working on the paper researching. No, that's fine.
Do you want me to make a big
It's the researching to improve learning and life, which is, okay, so I got the proposal accepted, because if you don't get the proposal accepted, you can't do anything anyway. But then getting the proposal accepted, I don't know whether you're anything like me, then you think, what on earth was I thinking? You start to sort of work with the ideas that seemed like a good idea at the time, you seem to summarise it, and then I expect that's why I like the local attention and the traumas that actually presenting at the conference does. It forces me to actually be clear about what it is that I'm talking about. So as I was working on this, researching to improve learning and enhancing life, and it doesn't seem to me, as I worked on it, so I said, what do I mean by learning? We've talked a lot at this conference about learning. We always want to improve learning. And there's a piece out of a book that I read, and it comes back to me over and over and over again. That education is about, and he's got this piece at the beginning of his book where he's talking about this was sent round, whether it did or not, it doesn't matter to me. But a head teacher around to the staff at the beginning of every year in a New York school and say, dear teacher, I'm a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers. Children poisoned by educated physicians. Infants killed by trained nurses. Women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is, help your students become more human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Vikings. Reading and writing and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human. And for me, that encapsulated the problems I have when I say that in living theory we talk about an educational influences in learning. What learning? And for me, the learning that I'm talking about here, there are other forms of learning too, but the learning I'm talking about in living theory, which is where it takes me to, is the learning that actually contributes to the flourishing of community. So my question then changed from research from that to researching to improve learning, which enhances life. I think if I leave it there and say that for me encapsulates what it is that living theory research actually forces me to do, is to continually say, what am I talking about when I'm talking about educational influences that I'm having, that I'm responsible for in my own learning? What learning am I talking about? Skills, certainly, but more than that, it's actually how I can contribute to the flourishing of my own humanity, the humanity of other people, and as living as a human race, being humane. And I think that the workshop, I hope that you will have, rather than just talking about living theory, you learn it really by doing it. And then if you sit there in a fog and you go, what on earth is this about? My experience of working with Jacqueline for some time is each time when I've seen them starting these master's courses and so on, it's quite often people sit there for sometimes months. What is all this about? I don't get it. I'm not sure. It's something I want to know, but I'm not sure what it is. And then a pen drops. So through the workshop, get you started, and if you're thinking, I don't know who was it, that inspiring session that started the day, and I wasn't sure where this was going, I didn't know where it was going, but then I found something that I wasn't expecting. So I hope that you bear with us now with the workshop, and if you leave thinking, I think there's something in this for me to actually work forward, I'm not sure what it is, you're probably well on your way. If you go away thinking, I've got it, yes or no, maybe you're not there, because it's actually challenging ourselves. So, Jackie, do you want to start the script?
I wonder if I could invite the gentleman in the back row to join us. Are you more comfortable there? This is our community, right? I mean, this group that we have today, if you haven't given us emails yet in the other sessions, we would like your emails, because we're hoping this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship. And we'd like you to engage today in a start. Now, I know some of you already are started, but we're going to assume that most of us are beginning, because learning is always beginning somewhere, isn't it? So, we're going to start with a little exercise. Now, you'll notice that we use the camera on all of our sessions because this is our way of learning. We then go back and put them up on Jack's website, and we analyze them for what did we do pretty well there, and what can we do better the next time so that we feel like we've really made it a contribution to a better world, flourishing of humanity. Are we okay? So, we're going to start with a little exercise. So you need a partner. So it doesn't need to be somebody you know. You just need a partner.
Yes, I will.
Everybody got a partner?
Yes.
You might have to move. Somebody want to come and sit here and I'll be your partner?
Jackie, we are going to do 3. Is that okay?
No, you need one. It's a time issue. Marie, can you be a partner with somebody for the
Ben, yes.
Marie, can you be a partner? Okay. Shall I do you? Here, take the chair. Okay. All right, everyone. Just for a minute. Sorry, I hate interrupting flowing conversations. So, the person who got up earliest this morning, you're going to have to establish, because that's partner number 1. I'll just wait a minute. Partner number one is going to talk about what really matters to them. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be your education or anything, something that really gets you excited. So you're going to share that with partner number 2. Partner number 2 has a very important job. Listen. Listen with all of your heart. And take a few notes. You listen to what that other person has saying, what values you hear in there, what is really exciting about them. And then, in 3 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you to change roles. Are you following me?
Yeah.
Anyone not?
Should we know who 1 or 2 is yet? Say something about it.
Number 1 is the one that got up earliest this morning. All right.
But
I really hate to do this. Maybe I'm not going to do this. Okay, so it's time to change partners now. And so the same thing, talk to your partner about what really matters to you, and then the other person takes the notes. And I'll give you 3 minutes again.
each type of qualification.
Again, I really hate to interrupt, but
I can't believe it. You gave us less time.
these are what I call loving educational conversations. You know, I mean, it feels good to share what matters to you, and it feels so good to have somebody actually listen to you. That's so rare, isn't it? So, we need now some volunteers. If you could bring yourself to volunteer what you heard your partner telling you about what really matters to him or her, and they agree, would help us to move on to the next stage.
I was so fascinated by that. Now, as a surprise, what came up, what's important, yeah, she started off, it's rugby, and then she told me about her life. It's because of Wales and family being involved and the great experiences they have. Is that enough?
Yes. So it's what's the value that's in there that matters to you?
The value is that it's a place where I am surrounded by people who have the same interests as me outside of work. So it's a place to escape. I think sometimes it gives me that freedom of where I want to be. I meet new people, which is kind of out of what I do 9 to 5 every other day. They're best friends for the day, and then I go home and I have a different life when I go back home. So it's about having that kind of idea to be somebody else and have a different kind of identity of not just being mum or worker just for a couple of hours on a Saturday.
Well, that's delightful. It's great to have escapes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Somebody else would like to share.
I'd like to share the value that Dr. Rao has shared. Our major concern always is children, not only of particular place, but the children of all the world. And so like to see the children full of joy, learning in joy and peace, and all those conditions that happen to interrupt the joy and peace of children in the process of their learning. She finds that bad values, and all the process that she finds favorable for children to learn in joyful condition, she categorizes it as good values. That is what she said.
Very nice. Someone else?
No problem.
Okay. So Seth said some really nice thing, and it is always so nice, you know, to get to know somebody else asking straight questions. So he said that he likes very much to be challenged and to explore, and he likes adventure, and he likes, you know, to go in the world by himself, to be in nature by himself, because sometimes he just feels that, you know, life in a city, I suppose, you know, it's when you say, you know, it's very, I don't like noise, I don't like loud music, you know, I need to go in a place where I'm, you know, with my own sound. And also because, you know, this feeling of independence, going back to nature and, you know, not necessarily trusting everybody, you know, in your environment.
So if you were going to move that into a question, because essentially this is a values-based inquiry system, and we're trying to get better at living those values and trying to get better at improving our practice. So if you were going to think about, if that were a research question, what might you ask yourself? Starting with I, how might I?
That's a good question, actually. I couldn't think. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So, because I like to be challenged, and then trust is a bit difficult to me because I like to criticize people. Really sorry. Well, well, I have no judgment or whatsoever. But again,
You're honest anyway.
but again, I'm quite a critical person.
So is that something you might like to improve?
Yeah, but also I'm critical for myself. Having said that, as my PhD, I critique myself and I critique all the academic world, how they deliver the product. Well, I completed my PhD, don't worry about that. That's why I'm quite confident to talk about it. So that's me.
So is that something you might like to improve?
Yeah, I mean, improving yourself and then finding where is you in this world.
Yes.
Is particularly important, but sometimes you change from one phase to another phase.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like
And we've all in here who have done living theory have experienced that transformation.
yeah.
I think Sarah also, just through the 3 minutes that we had, that kind of inquiry that you were telling me about in the northeast of England, around Durham and Newcastle, I think you have got quite a powerful sense of questioning. Would you just say just a little bit, because it was really focused, wasn't it, on issues of poverty?
Yes, so I suppose motivated by a sense of justice and fairness, working in the northeast of England, which is quite a poverty-stricken area. Locally, we'd identified high levels of household debt as an issue that they wanted to work on. So we focused on that and we collected evidence and did community organising to try and challenge the policymakers on that. Is that what you would
Yes, I think so.
Sorry, I want to share his, which is really incredible because he's answered all your questions in that 3 minutes. So I want to, I mean, it's really nice and it's written down that way. So he's talked about how.
Can you give us your name again?
Sorry, Sri Krishna from Nepal. And he's talking about their developing country with a very deep culture. And they find that the education is not according to their culture and their values. So curriculum is not according to the values. So the learning is not good. Now see the sentence, why school education does not connect with the belongingness of the school learner? And so his question is, how can I enhance the belongingness? I'm sorry I interrupted, but I had to share it. It was really good.
So you're getting a sense of how you might come up with a question. I mean, it's something that matters to you. Otherwise, you're not going to invest the time and energy in it. So it has to be really personally important. So the question can be as simple as filling in, how do I improve this in my life, this part of my life? So as an example, I would like to solve the problem of children in poverty in the world. Clearly, that's not a doable question, correct? So what I do is, what can I do in my little piece of the world? So how can I improve the situation of children in poverty in wherever I am? That's a doable thing. So then you go to the next stage. How would I do that? So let's go back to your question about the families and the debt-ridden problems and so on. So what would you do? What would you do to collect data to answer that question?
What are you doing, I think?
Yes, or what did we do? Well, we worked with a group of local people who went round families in the area.
Sarah, could you please speak?
Yeah, so going house to house and asking permission to go and sit with families to collect the financial details of their lives, to work out how much debt they were in, why they were borrowing money, and the very high interest, looking at the interest rates they were being charged and the ways in which they were being manipulated to get into debt by these very unscrupulous lenders, and then using that evidence to then hold big, large public assemblies where we brought in the policymakers and the local government and the debt, some of the loan companies, to actually give the evidence from people's personal experience to try and then mount a campaign which linked into a bigger national campaign to try and change the law to cap the interest rates on these very high interest loans.
So would you like to take it from here, Jack?
Yeah, sure, because each one of you, if you like, becoming that kind of practitioner researcher where you're willing to ask the kind of I questions. Well, what am I doing, to improve something? Okay? Now, to go through that action inquiry cycle, which I imagine all of you actually do in terms of intuitively, because whenever you're faced with something that really matters to you, you imagine what to do about it. Then you act, and as you're acting, you might not do this, but in action research, it's very important to gather some data as you were doing, so that you can judge the influence of your actions. Okay? Now, that is you engaging in practitioner research through this kind of process, but you make it explicit. I mean, what we're claiming is that you go through these processes intuitively anyway, but to do it, make it research, you actually go through it explicitly and make it public. Okay? Now, that's exactly what you will be doing. Now, the only difference with what we do in relation to living theory and action research is that we take it, if you like, one step further, where we ask you to do actually what Julia was doing earlier, that Julia was actually being accountable to the values of hope that she was holding and explaining to us the nature of the influence over time. That we got Julia's explanation of her learning with the mums, usually the mothers, but there were others, but with the very diverse group, bringing them together, sitting them down, eating, reflecting, and trying to overcome that central problem that Julia was feeling about the migrants and the separation. But Julia was explaining her educational influence in her own learning, and then if we take it one stage further, like Sarah's doing, that Sarah is actually connecting to what we call the social formation. She was doing a large meeting, trying to influence policy and trying to influence the law. Am I making sense here? Because this is the stage that we actually all go through. And on the web here, if you get into actionresearch.net, what you'll see next week in the top right, at the moment we've put on the top, sorry it's a bit too small, I can't enlarge it, but on the top right in the red, there are all the proposals that we have accepted here. Next week, you'll have the details of the workshop, we'll have some of the videotape, we'll have our papers. Okay, so that will be explaining our educational influence, and I've encouraged Branko, the group that presented the keynote earlier, to make that available, because there's such a lot of cooperative learning that could take place from that keynote, when it was wonderful, the individual inquiries, but they could do some action research on their own practice together as they actually influence literally the world of educational research. Am I making sense there? Because some of you may have already created those kinds of explanations. Now it might be, do you want to share? I know Swaroop has, for example. Swaroop's got her doctorate by explaining her own practice within the Indian context. Jackie,
it was so similar to hers because it was a mother's outrage against what was happening to education in India, and I decided to do something about it. And even I'm not affiliated to any university. So
That's the
yeah.
same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a different context.
So you've done the same?
As a mother as well, drove well, as a
Yeah.
parent.
Would you like to tell us?
Yeah, no, it was just a local school-age childcare. We didn't have school-age childcare, and there were problems in the school, falling numbers, and class sizes were too big or whatever. So a group of mothers, 7 mothers, got together with a wider body of parents and school authorities and that, and we got the school-age childcare set up as part of the school campus. We brought in preschool-age childcare with 2 of our staff going into the classroom assistants and junior infants. We started teaching chess, and so the whole thing's branched out of that, but it actually changed the whole focus of school from education to driving parent partnership to a kind of more shared experience, which is family and community at the centre, and education as formal and informal spheres. And that was shared, and parents used to go to the classroom then and talk to children maybe about what they were doing in work and stuff like that. So it kind of changed the focus a lot.
So that's like what Jackie said, and
Yeah.
it's doable. What can I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so are you researching that?
I've done a PhD on it.
Wow.
Because we're going, sorry, this time I will be trying to be a better timekeeper. 5 minutes. But to connect up where you started, and you can tell me I've got this wrong, okay, because I'm continually learning. So it's an opportunity, a rare opportunity for me to actually work with Jacqueline. So the connection with where you started with, you started to talk about what's important to you, enjoyed doing, it's about the rugby. Now for me, as you spoke, I had a sense that you feel when you're actually in community, can't define it, but there's a sense of being in a loving community. When you were talking about critical engagement, both with the ideas of others and also with yourself, that then connection with, this is practitioner research. So also thinking about your science of practice, what is it? Practice is action. It's not just sort of thinking about it, feeling about it, it's actually how can we improve what it is that we are doing in our practice and then coming back to say, okay, what are the values that are emerging? Is it that sense of community as I'm working on? Is it that sense of, now do I understand better what I'm meaning by that? As I try to explain it to other people. With your critical engagement with others and yourself. How is that actually where I am? Or like Sanya said, actually looking at this in my embodied values, do I actually start to change my values? So that's why I said that the complexity of living theory just try to give you a start on some of the ways. And quite honestly, you start with wherever you are, rather than where you think you should be. But if you want more information and support, I've got some leaflets to give you a summary, but also there's some websites on the back, so you can connect up with that. I hope you've sent around your the email list. Whoever's got the list, if you could pass it on the sheet, so people can add. Can you wave the sheet at us as to where it is? So the email list has got someone. Someone's got the email list.
Yeah, no, this is really important
Start.
because it is.
There's a page.
Yes, gone around. There was a page.
Thinking. I pass this on now.
Yeah, no. The reason that's quite critical is that what we do afterwards is, next week you'll just get an email from us, and it will just be inviting you, if you wish, just to say a little bit about yourself and what you're doing. And our intention is that, within half an hour we can't cover very much, but we've been working together for years, and these conversations, like with some of you, like with Sarah, I've only just met Sarah, but I'm really stimulated by the work that Sarah's doing, and it would be lovely for me to keep a conversation going, where you can get through the emails on the pamphlet, or if you get into Action Research Net, at the bottom of it, there's the email that you can actually just write.
Yeah, no, what I wanted to say is that, in the presentation I have given, there would have been no ways for me to go ahead in what I was thinking and living if it wasn't for the Sunday evening Skype group, because through the conversation I had with, Marie, Jack, Sonia, and so many other people, I just could really share, as I would do with friends, what I was living, but also knowing that if I talked about values and living theory and living contradiction, I didn't need to start from the beginning, and it really helped not feeling isolated. Like, they gave me such a loving support, because, I don't live in the same countries, we are all dispersed, and it is so fundamental, because I don't think you can do research, and especially a self-study, a self-inquiry, and I-based research without loving relationships around you.
Yeah. And can I just say, this is the first time that I've heard Julia present at an international conference.
Because it is my first time.
Now, I've got a video, which I personally had the presentation inspired, and I want to go back to it. Now, that will be on the web early next week. And when I send around the email, you will have the URL if you want to revisit that. But it's for a purpose. It's to see that Julie can actually share with you, and then you could actually share with us in terms of the work you're doing. For example, Sigrid. I know Sigrid at the University of Life Sciences in Norway, near Oslo, has actually started a new job within the university, and that's after doing some work in Tanzania. I just happened to know that Julie had also done some work in Tanzania, so it was lovely to be able to connect. But Sigrid starting this new job, which is going to be very taxing, to bring together academics throughout the university to look at their pedagogy and actually share it. But it will be lovely because Sigrid is starting that now. And yet she's got a whole history.
Just smile, Sigrid. They will love you.
Let me just say that I think what you've just said about what Sigrid is doing, so you're making connections for other people. And rather than just, this email then we can send out to you and say these are some URLs. But we're also realistic. You cannot have an individual conversation with 30 people, 300 people, 3,000 people. And you're talking about how can you spread the ripples. So if you go onto Jack's website on Living Theory, and it's on the deck, if you have a look for a living poster, and if you share your living poster, your sites of practice, what it is that you're interested and excited by, where your values are, then other people can find you. You're offering them support, not giving, offering. I like that notion of offering rather than giving. You can't put anything in it. And if somebody accepts, in the same way as you could actually look at those, and by accepting and saying, oh, that person looks as though I'd really like to have a further chat with Sigrid. So you can find Sigrid and you can actually offer to make a connection with her. And that way, we actually start to move this as a social movement rather than it being all directed onto as though one person is going to can answer everything. And much as I love these people, no one person can answer everything. Yeah? We've all got different things that we can actually offer. So make different connections, and this is a way of doing that. I do hope that you do that, because I'd really like to know more about each of you, and there's no one can do it within a few minutes or a few hours.
But what Marie did was a group of researchers from Mongolia. We didn't even know that they were doing actual research in Mongolia, but Marie has put the details of the Mongolian Action Research Group on the Living Poster site. With the work you're doing in Nepal. Now again, we've only learnt about that, the work you're doing with the Kathmandu at the conference. But you can actually, and this goes for everybody, just create your own living poster. You can actually send it to us with those emails that are actually on the website. And we can add it so that people can actually connect. Is that okay? Is there anything else, Jackie? Or are we
Thank you so much for coming. We do hope that we can sustain this connection.
If anybody wants one of Jack's latest books,
Good. Well done.
That was really good. I think forward for my next stage in life, because I retired from the institution about 10 days ago.
Which one?
Pedagogical University, Tyrol. But I'm continuing with certain things with my ECML project that we're presenting later, but also I have to engage in social commitment.
Yes.
And my next little thing is working with sort of disadvantaged children on reading competencies, because that's kind of a little way to start, but this really gives a way to give it a format.
Yes,
so
and
I'd
your
like
values
to come
continue.
back.
Good.
I'd like to come back to Durham and tell people what I've started to do concerning social commitment, and I'll definitely go on the
Please,
website.
and if you did a living poster,
Yeah.
that would be wonderful, because with your values, it's not a case of you are retiring, do you know what I mean? It's actually you're moving into
I'm getting out of the bloody
institution.
I wanted to say, Jack, and I want to say it now, in case I forget. I love the workshop. And you know what? While it was going on, I realized I'm going to do this in Sardar Patel. Instead of making it a lecture, I'm going to do it. So I'll make as a workshop. So I'll make the format and I'll mail it to you.
Yeah, great.
And if you think it's okay or I need to add something, then you can tell me.
Yes, I will, with
because
pleasure.
this was so easy. And otherwise, they just get into a muddle.
I know, and if you have a look round,
This is something that will give me.
Exactly. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to make them do the project which I'm making them do as a living educational project. Thank you very much.
No, that was really exciting.
Yeah, to me it was great. I'm sorry I keep interrupting.
Oh, not at all. No, it's a really good contribution. It's great. Good. Okay. Oh, right. Now, good. Yeah. Oh, it was a fabulous group, you know, because we said, would he just go and chat with that person there? Turned out this way, she's a professor in social thing at Durham University, doing all this work on the North East. Oh, that was in 3 minutes. Oh, gosh.
That worked really well, actually. Really. I think from all the workshops we did, that one was the most enabling.
Engaging.
People really could, it was really good.
Yeah, we've done that. I've done it several times, you know, but with Jackie. And we've seen that. But today was a real delight.
It was a really good.